የሐሳብ ገበታ ሐሳብ ያለ ልዩነት ሚዛናዊነት እንዲሁም በአሳታፊነት የሚንሸራሸርበት ቤት። በሐሳብ ገበታችን ወቅታዊ፣ ማህበራዊ፣ ፖለቲካዊ እንዲሁም የሕግ ጉዳዮች በስፋት በጥልቀትና በአካታችነት ይቀርባሉ። የሳምንቱ እንግዳም የሳምንቱ በተጋባዥ የማህበረሰብ አንቂዎች፣ ፖለቲከኞች እንዲሁም ሙያተኞች የሚቀርቡበት ፕሮግራም። ወቅታዊ ጉዳይ፣ ወቅታዊ ሀገራዊ ጉዳዮች የሚዳሰሱበት ዝግጅት፣ የውይይትና የክርክር መድረክ። በተለያየ ጎራ የሚገኙ ታላላቅ ፖለቲከኞች፣ የማህበረሰብ አንቂዎች እንዲሁም ሙያተኞች በሐሳብ ዙሪያ ፊት ለፊት የሚወያዩበት ከዛም አልፎ የሚሟገቱበት ፕሮግራም። ህዝባዊ መድረክ በተለያዩ ጉዳዮች ላይ ሁሉም የሐሳብ ገበታ ቤተሰቦች በቀጥታ ሐሳባቸውን የሚያቀርቡበትና ተሳታፊ የሚሆኑበት ለቤተሰቦቻችን እድል የምንሰጥበት ጊዜም። እነዚህና ሌሎች ሳምንታዊ ፕሮግራሞችን ለእናንተ እናቀርባለን። ይህንን የተወደደ ቻናል ሰብስክራይብ በማድረግ ቤተሰብ ይሁኑ፣ በስፋት ተደራሽ እንዲሁም ለሌሎች ያጋሩም። የሐሳብ ገበታው እንዲጠናከር በተሻለ ጥራትና ስፋት ወደ እናንተ እንዲደርስ በሐሳቦ በሙያውና በገንዘቡ ይደግፉን። የሐሳብ ገበታን በሱፐር ቻት፣ በሱፐር ታንክስና በሱፐር ስቲከር አጋርነቱን ያሳዩን። በጎፈንድሚ አማራጭ የሐሳብ ገበታን ያበረታቱ። ስለ ሐሳብ አስተያየቶ እንዲሁም ድጋፎም እናመሰግናለን። ዓላማችን የሐሳብ ማህበረሰብ መፍጠር ነው። የሐሳብ ገበታም
Good evening, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. How are you there? Sorry for being late by 5 minutes. It's all my fault. I was stuck somewhere. Anyways, we are here. Today I'm going to have a special guest who is a friend of Ethiopia by now. His name is Rasmus Soderriiis. እንኳን ደህና መጣ ራስሙስ፣ እንዴት ነህ?
እንኳን አብረን መጣን። በጣም አሪፍ ፕሮግራም ነው። ብዙ ትኩረት የሚስብ ሰዎች እዚህ ይመጣሉ አይደለም? I don't speak very good Amharic, ግን እንደዚህ አፍ
You are already trying. ጥሩ እያወራ ነው። አይ ለሰላምታም ይሆናል። ኢትዮጵያ ውስጥም እንደነበርክም ያሳያል እና
Are we going to do the whole interview in Amharic? Because then
No, it is an English podcast. I'm just saying hello to you in Amharic since you can
ሞክራለሁ፣ በአማርኛ ሞክራለሁ፣ ግን በደንብ አልችልም።
አይ አንተ ትችላለህ። አልችልም እያልክም ትችላለህ። በጣም እናመሰግናለን ስለተገናኘን፣ ደስ ብሎኛል። መልእክት ማስተላለፍ የምትፈልግ ካለ ለኢትዮጵያ ሕዝብ በአማርኛ መጀመሪያ any message in Amharic to the Ethiopian people?
በአማርኛ በጣም ቆንጆ አቀራላችሁ። አሁን መግባስ በጣም አወዳለሁ፣ ግን አሁን ትንሽ አደገኛ ነው አይደለም? አሸባሪ ያለ ከአዲስ አበባ ቅርብ ይመጣሉ፣ ግን መግባስ አወዳለሁ።
በጣም እናመሰግናለን። Thank you so much. Yeah, it is very difficult these days. And the Ethiopia you knew a couple of decades ago is, I wouldn't say fundamentally different, but still different than it used to be before in so many different ways. Most importantly, when it comes to the political landscape, because saying quite a lot is preaching it to the choir, because you know Ethiopia inside out. That said, let me ask you, let's start off with a very general question. What do you know about Ethiopia and about the Ethiopian people? What is your engagement with Ethiopia and how long have you been there?
Right, so I arrived in 2004, just being curious. I'd been to Eritrea before that. And, you know, all the young people in authoritarian regimes, they always romanticize the enemy country. And so everybody was saying, you know, Ethiopia, it's freedom, democracy. So I wanted to check that out. I came in Fasika and during Easter 2004. And I found people were complaining quite a lot about the regime. They didn't find themselves living in democracy. And I said, no, you're complaining too much, you know. Now you're having an election. That was the 15th of May, the Ginbot Sabbath election. So what are you complaining about? And then I really learned a serious lesson that democracy was over after that election. And I kind of followed the Ethiopian people's struggle against the TPLF, EPRDF government for many years. I've lived for a total of 7.5 years, I think now, since 2004. I have covered adoption scandals for Danish media. I've written about Ethiopian culture for Chilean media. Not so much about politics, you know. Back in the days when Getachew Reda was Minister of Communications, you couldn't write about politics without risking getting deported. So, but now I can write about politics. So that's what I've been doing.
That's very interesting. Actually, I would like to pick up on that last point. So there was the role which changed quite dramatically. Getachew Redda being in the receiving end during the civil war. We'll come to that brutal civil war. But how do you see the difference when Getachew Redda was the Minister of Communication back then, and the Getachew Redda we knew during the war, and the Getachew Redda who is making the headline today? If you have to compare those two Getachew Redda.
I mean, he was very bellicose during the war, right? But now he's apparently the new dove compared to others in Tigray. I don't know. I don't want to judge him as a person. I think he's not a hated figure, but of course there was a lot of military bravado during the war. And also when he was a minister, I remember he was saying, these terrorists, we're going to put them in prison. He was pretty rough. Yeah. Now he's made peace, right? He's relatively he's somebody who the Ethiopian government thinks it can do business with.
Oh yeah, we'll discuss about some of the actors during our interview, because since you just mentioned, I just wanted to follow up with that. Part of it being that our politics, Ethiopian politics, to some extent it changes dramatically, but most of its structure is still exactly the same for a keen observer, unless you are a hit and run journalist who has no clue about the complex dynamics of the Ethiopian politics, the structure, the political culture, the election, the constitution, power sharing, you name it. So that's why I was alluding to that point. But that's it. So let me follow up with your engagement with Ethiopia and why you think that the Western media is not quite fair to Ethiopia. We'll come to the details, but I'm just saying generally, what is your observation about the Western media's portrayal or reporting about Ethiopia and events related to Ethiopian politics?
Right. So basically, they kind of skipped the 2.5 years between Abiy ascending to prime minister until the war began, because there was a pattern of escalation. There was a fight over control of the military, over the economy, and they just very deceptively turned it into an issue of tribal rage, right? Of tribalism, when really there was also a power struggle that was more important. Of course, there was an ethnic dimension. There always is. But that was just made, simplified. And very generally, I would say that they believed the TPLF's propaganda that this was a tribal war. That was very much in the TPLF's interest to present it as a tribal war. But they should have investigated the escalation.
So basically, you are saying that history did not start on the November 3rd, 2020.
No,
if I can put it mildly.
No. Of course, you could say that the war began escalating about the Ginbat Sabbat 2005. 5 elections. Set on our Sabbat election. Or when Meles died, certain dynamics were set in train. But I think a crucial point, a crucial time to start is when Abiy becomes prime minister and the TPLF is reluctant to give up control of the military and the economy and tries to fight back. And Bronwyn Brusen, very distinguished scholar, she actually wrote about that and said this could lead to war, and was very likely to lead to war. And I remember reading her at the time, and I was sort of dismissive. Oh, these grumpy old war houses in Tigray, they are making trouble, but they're not going to start a war. They're not that crazy. But she was right. She foresaw everything that happened afterwards. So I'm writing about that in the book as well, because I think it's important to give credit to the people whose predictions are proven right, because it shows they have a correct model of reality. Whereas others who have been mispredicting everything all along, they continue to be treated like experts.
So that brings us actually why you wrote about this book. So what prompted you to write this book entitled, which is just released today, and I had the privilege of reading the PDF, the earlier version. So first of all, congratulations for getting it finally out.
Thank you so much.
Hopefully people will enjoy reading it. So it says the title is very telling itself without even delving into the nitty and gritty part of it, which is getting Ethiopia dead wrong. Not only wrong, but dead wrong.
Right. Yes. So some people have objected to that, saying it sounds almost like it was an honest mistake, and so you could say that it implies that they're just dumb, but not really evil, right? But I think, I've been thinking about that a lot. I think even the most evil people always believe that they are in the right. Okay, they always do. Even Dr. Mengele probably thought he was doing humanity a great service, right? So I don't think that's really the point, whether it's an honest mistake. And I think human mind can always convince itself that it's in the right if it has certain beliefs, right? Certain ideology or certain a side that it supports. So yeah, I stand by that title, but I have a long discussion in part 4 about whether the West was, to put it crudely, dumb or evil, stupid or evil.
So the mistakes aside, whether the mistake was honest or otherwise, or whether the mistakes were pure miscalculation, or it was deliberate, or the list goes on. But
absolutely, I think there was a lot of mistakes as well, right? They messed up a lot, but because they had what I describe as a moral superiority complex that led them to those mistakes, and other people, of course, they had very close contacts to the TPLF, fought during the years of TPLF, EPRDF regime. So yeah, it's you've got to remember, countries don't really exist. The West doesn't exist. These are just fictions. What exists is human beings, right, with their individual motivation. So I try to analyze it more from that point of view, because we're so used to these fictions talking about national interest and countries, but we must remind ourselves they are only fictions, right? They can be useful, of course, but it's not so simple to say the West this, that country that. You gotta go into the individual level. I try to do that quite a lot in the book.
And of course, when we talk about politics, always at the heart of politics there is interest, right? Whole set of range of interest, and every individuals, they have their own personal interest, and there is also grand interest, be it in the form of course, Western policy, and each media. Also,
the journalists have their interest too. The do-gooders in the big international organizations and Amnesty International, they all have their interests, right? And they all think of themselves as good people.
Yeah, so I'm still trying to set the ground for our most important issues. So I asked you why and when did you decide to write a book?
Well, it came gradually when the war broke out. I didn't expect to write about it at all. And so my Ethiopian friend was saying, look, the West is siding with the TPLF. I said, no, they're not that stupid. They know that the TPLF cannot rule this country again. No, I was kind of in denial for very long. And then I realized, yeah, they really were, if not supporting the TPLF, definitely they were not supporting the elected, internationally recognized government. And that alone I thought was bad enough. So then I was so angry, I couldn't write well. I was too angry. Too many adjectives. And also I didn't want to come across as some kind of conspiracy theorist. So I had to find the people, the scholars who had foretold this war, and who got Ethiopia right. And so it took me like a whole year to write the book after the war was over. It came out in a preliminary version on September the 3rd, 2023. It came out in a version that's available for free online on Substack. And then I wanted to do an extended version, which I did, which also addresses the new war in Amhara region. And so I took almost a year to finish that.
It will take forever to finish to write about the Ethiopian politics, because it will be the more we try to understand and peel off the layer of Ethiopian politics, the complex it will get. But as a book project, you have to stop somewhere and
right. I think it's mainly focused on the Tigray War, as they call it, or the war in northern Ethiopia, the TPLF's war, right? It's mainly focused on that. But then I think there are a lot of lessons from that war that apply to the Fano situation. The same type of propaganda playbook, and the whole sort of ideological landscape of ethno-nationalism in Ethiopia. I'm not saying that they're quite different, right? One ethno-nationalist rebel group from another. They're very different, and yet they have something in common. So that's what I wanted to describe in the last chapter, the final part. Also because everybody is interested in a war that's still going on, right? It's still hot. So I added that as a final chapter of part 5. But 95% of the book is about the war in northern Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm.
And the lessons from that about the West and why the West betrayed. I could have called it the betrayal of Ethiopia or something like that too.
But betrayal would be a little misleading for me, because to betray someone, first you have to promise, right?
Right.
So yeah,
no,
so
but there was some promise.
Betrayal.
There was some promise, right? We will support you in your quest for democracy and liberalization. They gave him the Nobel Peace Prize. There was some promise there.
I would say that promise was never been concrete. So to talk about betrayal, there should be some sort of implicit promise. I wouldn't say the West has ever promised Ethiopia or Africa, for that matter, anything in this regard, unless we had inflated expectations from the usual suspects. So that being the case, that being the case. In this book, a lot of issues have been raised. I'm going to ask some of them, and of course we have to talk about it. But the substantial part of your time, which I believe you have been directly affected as much as we all did, is the so-called Tigray War. When I say the so-called, because it is called the Tigray War. It was a war.
Yeah, it's kind of we kind of stuck with that name, aren't we? Even if we don't like it.
Yeah, the name has already become popular. So. Where were you when the war broke out? And
actually,
how?
I was in Chile. I moved to Ethiopia in 2021 when Addis Ababa was being marched upon. But of course, I followed Ethiopian politics all the time. But yeah, it became more relevant when I was in Addis Ababa, in October 2021. And what I saw, everybody was really determined to defend the city, and there was this grit and unity, and people putting aside their old differences. Also, a lot of Tigrayan people, of course, who didn't feel comfortable in Addis Ababa. They weren't all hunted down. Some of them were arrested, but on the whole, of course, it was uncomfortable for them, which I can understand and sympathize with. I write about that in the book as well. But it was completely blown out of proportions in some of the coverage.
Great. So with that, I would like to still stick to that point before we move into the thick of it, which is it has become so difficult, even today as we speak, that writing about Ethiopia, talking about the Ethiopian civil war is such a painstaking, both physically and psychologically, and everything is polarized. We rarely agree on any issues. So how could you manage even to finish the book while there are barrage of insults and online abuses, that there is no space? Basically, there is no space for any civil conversation.
Yeah. No, I don't think it's been that bad in my personal case, but you're right. I mean, usually one side will say, you are atrocious, you commit rape and massacres, and then the other side will say, no, that's all a lie, but you do that, and so nobody will believe the other side, and everybody will believe everything that comes from their own side, even when it's propaganda. So that's why we need forensics. But then you would think, independent organizations would be trustworthy, but They all have an agenda. They're all politicized. So yeah, it's been terrible. I write about it, the ICRI, the various commissions that have looked into human rights abuses during the war, and I just end up saying, no, we don't need human rights experts with long Twitter records. We need hard-nosed investigators who look for evidence that will hold up in court, and we still need that, I think. It's the only way to sell it. But you're right. I mean, and it goes on and on. It's so hard to reconcile, right? When each side has its own version that the other was inhuman and cruel and monstrous. So
yeah. So one of the victims, primary victims of this war, civil war, is the truth itself, right? As you say. So when the truth is the victim, is there any specific group or individual or even entity to blame? Because in the midst of propaganda, and there is always competing stories, and it's this day, and I think one of the social media war is put into effect probably in the Tigray war in the 21st century, effectively. So all I'm trying to say is that all parties to war were trying to win the minds and hearts of the people at home and abroad. So is there any group to blame within this polarized conflict?
Yeah, definitely the media ran very fast with any kind of story. They should have been much more careful. But they were not afraid of fueling the war with these lies. But definitely the media has a lot to blame, because there's no accountability for getting it wrong. It's almost like they compete in putting out these horror stories, which sometimes is, I'm not saying that they did a lot of horrible things did happen, of course, but you need to wait until you have the confirmation, right? And when you are like a developing country like Ethiopia, really depends a lot on the outside world, on the rich and powerful countries. It looks to them for their support. It's inevitable. So they will manipulate public opinion in the West as much as they can. And definitely the Westerners underestimated the Ethiopians' capacity in that area. Of course, they are skilled propagandists, some of them very media savvy.
Yeah. So maybe before we get into the heart of our discussion, which I'm getting into in a minute, for someone who would like to know the central arguments of your book, can you share with us what you are trying to convey?
That we need some accountability for these people who rank among the great and the good of our media, diplomacy, humanitarian work, politics. We need to question them. We need to go into what they said and what they predicted, what came true, what didn't. And of course, we need to look at the Western priorities in Africa. And it's very difficult. It's very easy to run with a single story about Africa. Chimamanda, the famous Nigerian author, she's written about the danger of the single story about Africa. This is definitely a case study of that. Maybe actually a quite extreme case study of that, because I always assumed that the danger meant the danger of not understanding Africa, but here it was actually the danger of fueling a big war. So that's probably I mean, if you're interested in Ethiopia, you should read the book, but it's also talks a lot about media dynamics, the moral superiority complex of the West, and many issues to do with our contemporary society.
Yeah, I read the book. I read the book because I had the privilege, as I said, of reading the first version, which you sent me actually 2 weeks ago. I read the book. I even read again today a couple of chapters from the new book. So it is just for some audiences who would like to just get the gist of it that I'm asking. And of course, it's always very difficult to explain a book.
Read the preface. The preface is, I think the preface sums it up, right? And that's also a good sales pitch.
Yeah, the preface is actually is perfectly written. I didn't even comment on the book. Actually, I was thinking to probably maybe write my own review. That's why I was holding my own opinion, not to spoil the party. But there is also a sample. For some of you who would like to read the book, there are 3 options to read the book. One, there is a sample. The sample is provided for free. And for someone who is vigilant enough, then there is also a link to a free PDF.
There is, yeah.
If you are vigilant enough. And then the third, of course, we would appreciate if you buy the book, if you read the book. So
exactly,
you have these three options.
If you want it on your bookshelf, there's a paperback version. The inside is black and white. The cover is in color. It's $22. And there's a very expensive premium color version for the rich people who want to support me at $95. And then there's the ebook at $8. And then if you just read the sample, you get to the note to readers, and there's a link to, because I know a lot of Ethiopians don't have international credit cards, or maybe they can't afford a book on an Ethiopian wage. So everybody can read it if they have internet.
Yeah, all the options are here. I displayed it. You can find it on Amazon, Getting Ethiopia Dead Wrong. You have a Kindle version, and you literally have all the options he was making. So the Kindle version is $8. The paperbacks, there is €22. There is also hardcover, $95. So you have whole range of these options just to get to read the book. Even there is a free version, which is rare. So why did you provide the link to free to read for free?
Because I want to have readers more than I want to make money. And a lot of Ethiopians, they just don't have international credit cards. And
but you are also being accused that you are all the Ferengis. Now you understand me. All the Ferengis are here only to make money out of writing a book about Ethiopia, and they are all scavengers who are basically preying on the corpus of Ethiopia. That is one of the accusations. So isn't it not so contradictory when you are providing it even for free?
Yeah, you're right. I definitely didn't start this to make money. Okay. I don't mind making a little bit because I've been working basically for 2 years for free. But if you can support me and you want to have the book on yourself, great. If not, I just want you to read it, share it, comment on it. Yeah, share it, especially with your Ferengi friends, because it has been written in so as to persuade the skeptics, right? That's what I wanted to. I tackle the whole range of these hair-raising accusations that have been in the media. The using starvation and rape as a weapon. I mean, I don't shy away from anything. I want to grapple with every topic, right? I don't want to leave anything unsaid. I don't want to say anything I can't prove. I don't want to say, paint a rosy picture, propaganda picture. I want to grapple with everything. So that's why I think it's quite fitting as a tool to convince the people who don't maybe not know so much about Ethiopia. I've tried it with a few people who have basically changed their perspective after reading it. So I hope it'll be used for that. I hope Ethiopian diplomats will, point their diplomat friend from other countries to read it. And so I hope it will change minds. That's what I really want.
Exactly. So with that, let's move, because we come to the book again and we share the link with you guys, and then just be there and make some noise. Share the link. We can share the link. So share this link with others as well, and we'll get back to you more about the book and where you can get it in the middle and around the end of our discussion. Now let's go into the thick of it, as they say. Can we briefly tell us about the causes of the civil war itself? So where did the international community, including most of us, probably even the domestic audience, got the causes of the civil war wrong or maybe right?
Right. So I have a special section called the causes of the civil war, right? So it was a power struggle. There was TPLF's refusal to vacate the disputed territory with Eritrea that had been awarded to Eritrea by International Boundary Commission, that was legally Eritrean territory. Abiy Ahmed, Prime Minister, had agreed to vacate this land, and they refused, right? So that was one reason. Then they did withdraw to Tigray when they lost power, but they didn't give up control of the military. They still tried to exert control over the economy, and there was the assassination attempt on Abiy. It didn't last more than 3 months before there was an assassination attempt. So there was always a very tense situation. was especially about control over the military, the economy, and the land, the border with Eritrea.
We will come to each and every aspect of it, including the actors who played crucial roles in that regard. But you have said also that only quite few, if any, people understood that the storm was coming, tsunami was coming, and you singled out one particular person for getting that the war was coming.
Yeah, I think when the war was closed, a lot of people predicted it, of course. Once you got into September, October 2020, nearly everybody was predicting it. That's true. But Bronwyn Brutens, he predicted it very clearly already in 2018, I think it was. I write about that in the book because it's like she had a crystal ball. The only thing she didn't foresee was COVID. And also, of course, Anne Fitzgerald made a lot of warnings about the danger of having these regional militias. Mm-hmm. So there are many people who got Ethiopia right. They're just not interesting to the media. And, yeah, there was no follow-up. Sorry.
Had you got a chance to consult me before maybe getting your final version out? I myself wrote in October 2018 that the war was coming, saying the TPLF. I will display here in American, and then it's just as part of our conversation. This is my post on Facebook in 2018, October 2018. I said TPLF. Yeah. Well, so I mean, I'm saying that those of you who think that the TPLF is gone, you are dead wrong. I describe the TPLF as the tree that's grown in the desert. So the tree which is grown in the desert usually that it lives of its leaves, right? And once it gets a rain, and it will surprise you. So I said actually the TPLF will use three strategies. I said they retreat, regroup, and then regain power. That is the 3 R I used in October 2018 as well. Well, that was on Facebook, and that wasn't popular enough back then. I'm just saying.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
Yeah,
so there are also some Tigrayans who wrote about it, and even in English, and Tigrinya said that the TPLF wouldn't give up; they would regroup and come back. So that's quite interesting, yeah.
Yeah, even though the talk is that they never interested in power, they actually freely relinquished everything, and Abiy and others were chasing them and coming after them. That's one of the narratives. So now let's deal with some aspects. How why is November 3rd so important for you? Because some people are saying November 3 wasn't even a trigger. Last week I was talking to Tom Gardner, who wrote a book again about Ethiopia, another person. Actually, 3 people wrote a book about Ethiopia. One is you, the other one is Tom Gardner over years, and then the other guy was Pierce. So he said November 3 was not even a trigger of the war. But for you, November 3, when the Northern Command was attacked, it was actually decisive. Why is it important for you?
I think any country having its military barracks attacked and thousands of soldiers mowed down, of course, it's a clear case for war. You cannot. I mean, some of the newspapers, they wrote that TPLF had challenged Abiy Ahmed's authority. That's a hell of a metaphor, a hell of a euphemism for raiding national armories. I mean, it was clearly it was the Ethiopian Pearl Harbor, right? It was clearly the beginning of the war. I'm not saying it was more than a trigger. I'm not saying it was the underlying cause, but it was definitely something that had to be responded to no matter what. I don't see how they could not have gone to war after that. That would have been suicidal. I don't know. I mean, you could speculate about what would have happened if they had decided not to respond. A lot of people I remember at the time were saying, look, the TPLF deserves to be beaten back, but they're too strong, so Abiy should just negotiate or something. So a lot of people were saying that. I think with hindsight, that wouldn't have worked.
With the trigger factor itself, there are some evidences, concrete evidences, and of course there are also some speculations that even way before November the 3rd, both parties were preparing. Actually, even the Amara Special Force were preparing, and the Eritrea and Ethiopia were encircling the TPLF, basically the Tigray region. So they are equally claiming that, wait a minute, you were preparing, you were also trying to take the military advantage. All we did is taking a preemptory measure, just basically to disable you. So what would be your response to that?
Yeah, that's a very strong measure to take, just a preventative measure. But of course, it's true that there was a lot of preparation for war. But still, they fired the first shots. They did this brutal attack. It was kind of the tipping point when there was no return from war. Was the attack on the Northern Command.
Okay, all right, fair enough. So let's talk about how the international media were reporting about the course of the war itself, which is so important. And I found it from the beginning to the end of your book, it was actually talking about why the West get Ethiopia wrong. And in the process, of course, they were reporting wrong. They were coming up with they are not based on real concrete evidence, and they were reporting by sitting far away, not going to the war side. Of course, then it was blocked, and they will bring up that justification. How can I get an access when you are blocking it? And then there is also a bias, a clear bias in the media narrative and all those stuff. So what was your observation, and how are the media organizations were biased towards the Ethiopian government?
Yeah, I mean, from the very beginning, I thought they do focus a lot on individual events. They never zoom out to see the bigger picture of who has the legitimacy to use force, right? Because that's, usually when you have a rebel group, you would say, does it have a legitimate case for war? Where they cheated, robbed of an election victory? Well, the excuse they invented here was genocide, right? Of course, if the alternative is complete, to be exterminated as a people, complete annihilation, then you do have a legitimate case for war. So that was kind of the excuse they came up with. And I was just startled how the international media, by and large, bought that. Of course, the Ethiopian Federal Army depended on Eritrea, and they didn't have as much control over the military as they would have liked. They depended on support from Eritrea, which has a very bad human rights record, and from Fano, which is also a volunteer militia, which is, I don't want to tie everybody there with the same brush, but of course some volunteer militias are more likely to attract extremists, right, than the national military. So it was fair to have some scrutiny of the Ethiopian war machinery or war tactics. But what was not fair was to completely blur the bigger picture, that this was a legitimate government, internationally recognized, fighting the dictatorial old guard, which had no legitimacy. I think initially very few young people in Tigray wanted to fight for these old people, for these rich, corrupt, cruel old men. But with the story about rape and starvation and massacres, that was a good way to recruit young people in Tigray. And,
but speaking of legitimacy, which is core to the discussion of the causes of the war, even to the course of the war, then there is also an argument which apparently seems to be a very strong argument, that after September 30 or Mascaram Salasa, then there was no legitimacy because the Ethiopian government had no authority to stay in power. That's what they were saying. They were basically delegitimizing the Ethiopian government because the Ethiopian government was no more legitimate after 30th of September 2020.
Right. But I mean, who gets to decide on the constitution what's right or wrong? We have the House of Federation. There are certain rules. They should have just waited. I mean, there was COVID. It was an excuse used all over the world. Maybe there were other factors involved in the postponement of the election. such as the lack of security in many places. But to go to war over COVID postponement, it doesn't make sense.
But then they also held a regional election, which is touted by them, by the supporter of the TPLF back then. Before the outbreak of the war, there was no TDF, but was just TPLF, saying they held a legitimate election, regional election, in defense of the federal government authority. And what would you say about that? And do you think that somehow led to the outbreak of the war?
No, I don't think it led to the war. I don't think it was, but of course it was an act of defiance of the constitutional order. But I don't think it was what led to the war. I think it could still have been solved after that.
Was there any room to avoid the war? Was the war inevitable? I know that you have touched upon the book itself.
I don't think after the attack on the Northern Command it could have been avoided, but before that, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm saying before that, of course. After it was attacked, then what is there? All I'm saying is, well, before November 2020, for example, we had 2 years period, right? Grace period.
Right.
Would things could have been different if both sides are taking different course of actions?
Yeah, I'm sure.
So what would that be? In retrospect, I'm saying.
Yeah, the TPLF should have negotiated. They could have got a much better deal than the Pretoria peace agreement if they had done that during 2018, 19, 20. Of course, yeah.
We'll come to the Pretoria agreement as well. So let's bring in the Eritrea factor. Do you first of all agree that Eritrea has any legitimate concern to be involved in the war?
Yeah, it did, because the TPLF had occupied Eritrean territory, recognized by international law, for many, many years, and also fired missiles against Eritrea. Now, I don't want to come across as justifying the regime in Asmara. I know it's a dictatorship. It has a horrible human rights record, but absolutely, it had a legal right to respond to the missiles being fired at Asmara and to reconquer these territories that belong to Eritrea under international law.
So when you say about the territory, you are referring to Badme, right? And the surrounding area.
Yeah, Badme and many areas, yeah.
Yeah, as to firing the missile, there is an evidence that it was fired basically a week after Eritrea was already soldiers were found in Ethiopia, but then that was still.
But when you're at war, the bar for legitimacy is quite low, right? Ethiopia needed Eritrean involvement, otherwise you could have had TPLF walking to Addis Ababa, right? And it would have been complete chaos, would have been a disaster, would have destroyed the country. So Ethiopia depended on Eritrea and was grateful for Eritrean assistance, and had, in a war, you can't be so choosy with your allies. You can't filter them for good governance. You just take what you can get. And I remember the Ethiopian people were very grateful to Eritrea, even if, Eritrea doesn't have very good relations with Ethiopia right now, and has a very different regime.
For that matter, the Ethiopian Prime Minister himself officially thanked the Eritrean people and soldiers. Yeah. So, as you said, it was obvious, and it is clear. It's out there for everyone to see. So, basically, the border was porous. That's one of the reasons. The other one is Eritrea has a legitimate concern because of the contested border and the missile being shot, and of course, basically, people are talking about the invitation. So Ethiopia has every right to invite Eritrea if attacked or if wanted to.
Right. Doesn't have any right to commit war crimes. That's for sure. But it had the right to invite Eritrea to work with whatever allies were willing, because it was a legitimate government.
But after seeing what happened, especially, the scars of war, and now sitting here, at least somehow detached, emotionally detached from the war, that Eritrea involved in a very brutal way, mistreating the Ethiopians. I mean, even though we have a problem within ourselves, the Tigrayan people are still our people. So do you think that was a good idea, good policy to invite the Eritrean soldiers who were basically there for vengeance?
Well, were they? I mean, I don't know what is true and what's not true. Of course, I condemn any kind of war crime and human rights violation, but some of what has come out about, for example, the Axum massacre, which I write very extensively about, whatever is known about that, it turned out not to be true. So I would be careful. In the beginning, I was pretty sure that Eritreans were committing horrible war crimes. Now I'm not so sure anymore. I would certainly need to see very clear evidence, forensic evidence of some of these accusations.
All right. So let's move to the actors somehow now. And in this book, as I promised, we'll get back to the book. Here is a cover. Getting for those of you who are tuning in late after we have started, we are discussing about the book written by my guest, Rasmus Soderriiis, Getting Ethiopia Dead Wrong. It was just released. You can find it on Amazon. And on this book, we have a number of notable figures and the faces there. Why did you include? We will discuss about some of them, couple of them. Why did you decide to use these pictures on the front page of your book?
Yeah, I wanted to make it about these named and shamed individuals, right, who did so much harm. And they are, they rank among the great and the good. That's how I begin it. They rank among the great and the good. And some of them have just behaved so unscrupulously. It's unbelievable. So it's personal. It's about them. They are the pantheon of villains, the ones you see there. Some more than others, definitely. Tom Gardner is out there. He's not one of the worst, but he's there in a small picture. I know you interviewed him.
I interviewed him.
I have a whole section about him.
He was also expelled from Ethiopia. So since you know that story as well, can you tell us about why you included him there anyways?
Yeah, we even had a nice little good faith exchange of emails in those ancient days of November 2021 when TPLF was marching on the capital. And I asked him if he was going to retract and apologize for saying that Ethiopia was trying to starve all Tigrayans to death, because that's what he had written in The Economist. And the joint report had just come out and said there was no evidence of that Ethiopia was not collaborating with the World Food Program, which I think has been quite borne out since then by people from the World Food Program, that Ethiopia was collaborating with the relief aid effort into Tigray. So I asked him, and he said, "No, of course not. I know they're using food as a weapon." But it was a good faith exchange. And then he wrote, after he got expelled, he wrote what I call the pot calling the kettle black. He wrote about how Abiy was pouring fuel on the fire by asking the Economist's readers and Ethiopians abroad to correct the narrative that he had put out in The Economist. He thought that was pouring fuel on the fire, but The Economist said no favors for killers. They're killing all the Tigrayans, and that was not pouring fuel on the fire. That was okay. So that's why I called him the pot calling the kettle black.
Then some other figures in the picture as well. For example, you have Professor Alex D. Wall. In what way has he contributed to the war machine?
I mean, he was very dedicated to the TPLF narrative. He likes to talk about his friendship with Meles Zenawi and how the red carpet is rolled out for him when he went to visit Soyem Teshome. And so he's a very central figure at the BBC. And some of it was theatrical, like when he said Abiy has lost the war is over. There was no match for the Tigray Defense Force. And he even said to people like me, or people who supported the federal government, face your day of reckoning, he said. Okay. He also said just a week 2 weeks before the Pretoria peace agreement, he said, Tigrayans have every motive to fight to the death. I thought that was a terrible thing to write. And then it turned out they had more motive to live, which is
wasn't that what Getachew and his colleague were trying to avoid at the last minute, saying they had to save his people? Basically, that's what he said.
Sure, but the message from people like Alex de Waal was that if Tigray stops fighting, there will be no more Tigray, right? They will annihilate everybody. They will kill everybody. General Sadkan said that. Debretsion Gebre-Michael said that. So that was the narrative. The Holocaust Museum was warning against that. And we said, no, if the Ethiopian Federal Army prevails, that will bring peace. That will force the TPLF to negotiate, or it's the only realistic path to peace. But he said, no, they will fight to the death. Thankfully, he was proved wrong.
Yeah. But then, right. There is one aspect of the war which we cannot leapfrog without touching upon it. It is the course of the war, the way it was handled, which I myself has been objecting, because war has their own rules. There is international humanitarian law. There is law of war. So you have to conduct yourself in a proper way. You have to discriminate between civilians and non-civilians, combatants and non-combatants. The list goes on, and you know it. So isn't somehow very appalling to see the way the war was fought?
Sure.
The brutish nature.
Sure. I mean, I didn't see it firsthand. I don't know exactly what's true, what's propaganda, but of course, yeah. I don't think there's a single war that you could say it was all right. It was a gentlemanly exchange of fire. I don't think that doesn't happen much. But of course, yeah, I condemn every war crime, and I want justice for every war crime. Absolutely. But I don't lose sight of the bigger picture, of course, that there was one side that was legitimate and one that was illegitimate. I think when it comes to war crimes, I don't think TPLF was any better, for sure. What they did in Amhara and Afar was probably worse. But I don't want to be the judge of things that when I don't have the forensics and I haven't been an investigator in the field, right? But I've looked into Aksum massacre, for example, what actually happened, the different investigations, and how many lies were just quietly abandoned after a while when something else came up. So I have the deepest mistrust to all these investigators now, and I definitely read the small print and the footnotes.
Yeah, but I mean, as you said, we are yet to have a full investigation and accountability for the crimes committed anyways, even at the federal level. So we shall wait until justice will be served, if it will ever be served. And that's because then we are not a judge here, as you said, but we are just reflecting on what happened. And that brings us to the power of misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. I call them actually the triple pathology of information disorder. Right. So how did that contribute to the conflict and the atrocity itself?
Yeah, it's incitement to hate, right? It's kind of ironical. A lot of the Western media were complaining, oh, there's incitement to hate in Ethiopia, but they were the ones inciting to hate, right? When they describe atrocities, and you have to be sure that it's true, right? I mean, some of these stories, there are absolutely no evidence for what they were saying. It was just anonymous witnesses.
Yeah, nonetheless, there have been atrocious crimes committed, right? Even though we disagree on the nature of the crime and who committed what, there had been crimes committed, right? It was brutal.
Okay, so just because there have been crimes, you can just write anything, just lay it on thick and not care if it's true, if there's any evidence to back it up. I mean, I can give you some examples, like Lucy Casas. He wrote about an Ethiopian soldier crosses path with a Tigrayan refugee and hears something critical being said by a little toddler, a 4-year-old, and proceeds to execute the 4-year-old in front of his mother, and then threatens her to kill some more children if she takes the child with her for burial, right? That's like a story. Lucy Casas became a saintly figure, writing for all the big newspapers. Even The Economist, cleared their columns for her. But there's no evidence that this story is true, right? It's so extreme. You have to have solid evidence before you present a story like that. It was just accepted like nothing. That would never have watched if it had been about, say, an American soldier in Afghanistan or something. It just wouldn't. So there is a double standard. There's a different standard of proof when it's for Ethiopia.
I'm actually a bit pushing you, to name some names and trying to get the best out of you. That's what I'm trying to do in a soft way. So then we will mention also a couple of stories. Let me bring you back to around November, December 2021, in the height of the TDF march, not toward Addis, but TDF marching on the street of Addis. That is how it was reported. The CNN was there, the Economist was there. And how did you react to that when the Ethiopian press secretary, I remember, was hard to fight back on Twitter? And
said they were on the outskirts of Addis, right? But the implication was this would be fast, like in Kabul. Kabul had just fallen like a few months before. And the implication was that there was a cliche that was doing the rounds in journalism, which was it's a matter of weeks, if not days, right? That's what they were saying. So, and Alex de Waal was already celebrating, right, the victory of TPLF and taking over Addis. It was like a done deal in much of the press. And I just saw the unity and grit and sort of determination to get along among the people in Addis. And I read some Ethiopian analysts, and they were saying, no, now we will come together. Now we will beat back these attackers. And that's, of course, what happened. And I wrote that when everybody was, at least in the international press, there was this consensus that the fall of Addis Ababa was imminent. I said it's still unlikely. So I'm quite proud of that. I wrote that in a piece called Do Good as Doing Bad. So my first piece on the war.
It was translated into English as well. First, it was written in I think, Danish language.
In
right?
Danish, yeah. First in Danish. Yeah.
I read the English version, which is included in your book. So I'm not quoting the book or saying a lot because you are the guest, and I'm trying to get some message across. So you are the author of the book, so that's why I am not talking a lot about it. That's how it's supposed to work. Some people are asking me whether even I read the book. Of course, I read it actually 1.5 times. So now let me bring you to another story, very controversial this time around. The documentary by Nina Al-Baghadir, the CNN journalist. Why is that stirred up so many controversies back then?
Which one of them is this about the Ethiopian Airlines smuggling weapons?
No, that one.
About the floating corpses?
There's the floating corpus everywhere.
Yeah. That was one of the first stories, right? I didn't follow it at the time. I investigated it later. And the first versions mentioned that these bodies had been preserved 3 months before being dumped into the river, which sat oddly with the headline, which said, men walk out of prison to the riverbank, then corpses float, something like that, right? It was just made clear that they were frog marched to the riverbank and then shot and dumped in the river. And that's also what one of the testimonies said in the article. But then it turned out that they'd been dead for a month, at least 3 months before they were dumped in the river. So what explains that? And Ethiopians had the theory that this was a propaganda trick being played on the media, that these were the war dead, so they were fallen in battle. And it seemed to bear that out, right? The fact that they preserved the body for a very long time. But she didn't want to, even wonder why the bodies have been preserved for so long. She couldn't see, or she didn't want to talk about this obvious contradiction. And then they changed the story on CNN's website, but not completely. But anyway, you can use internet tools to see the original publications. So I did that too.
But ultimately, she won a prize for it. So doesn't that speak a volume that she was right, or she was reporting?
They win prizes for anything. I mean, but she won prizes. Wasn't that for the aviation story that Ethiopian Airlines had transported weapons to the front, which is a pretty normal thing to do, I would say, in a national emergency. I mean, you have to look at their legitimacy. Who has the legitimacy to use force? Who should win? Who is the country best served by prevailing by winning. I mean, that's the essence in war, isn't it? It's not just enough to say that they should fight by the rules of war. You need to look at who needs to win this war for the country to have a future that's as close as possible to democracy, or at least a hope for democracy. I know there's no perfect democracy in Ethiopia, but at least it would have been a lot worse if TPLF had come to power, an ethnically exclusive army that only makes alliances with one other ethnically exclusive army, the Oromo Liberation Army, which is very extreme. And, when you have moderates in every camp, that we have what I call mainstream Oromos in the book, and you have moderates of every ethnicity who can work together, surely we should be supporting them and not the ethnic extremists.
Okay, yeah. So I know that I vividly remember each and everything is because I was part of the story, because I was working on media, unfortunately or fortunately, over the last 3-4 years. That's why I remember every event, even though it is so traumatic to bring them back. Around the beginning, I would say, the Ethiopian government was losing the battle of narratives and on diplomatic fronts as well. And what would explain that, if you have observed that? Because it was so clear that the Ethiopian government side was so disorganized and disoriented, and be it on the media campaign or on the streets,
right.
It seems that the Ethiopian government was basically reacting instead of being proactive. So what was your observation?
Yeah, maybe they were caught unawares. They just took it for granted that the world would support them, which I did too, right? And then there's this military mindset in Ethiopia. You don't show weakness, right? You don't admit to anything, to any difficulties. Maybe that was part of it as well. So you just wanted to be seen as strong. Abiy said, this is just a law enforcement operation. It's going to be over in and it just came across as callous rather than as truthful and untruthful. A more empathetic style was needed, right? We're going to pull together. Our nation is threatened. This is a huge deal. It's not going to be over quickly, but we don't have any alternative. We need to come together to defend our country. This is not against Tigrayans. This is only against this rebel group. I think as the war went on, they found the right tone, including saying Tigray is the Tigrayans are our people. And I saw that a lot. A lot of people very determined to show, look, we don't have anything against Tigrayans. Although there are a lot of Tigrayans who, I knew personally, and suddenly they were saying, oh, you want us all dead. And it was so depressing to go through that. But in every war, you lose friends, unfortunately.
So one of the competing narratives, of course, was on the ground, on the streets and on media, was the Ethiopia shall prevail versus the Tigray shall prevail. So who prevailed ultimately? Are we better off today?
Yeah, I mean, of course, Ethiopia prevailed. There's no doubt about that militarily. And yes, we are. I think we're better off today. At least we have one less of a problem. But we still have a big problem with ethno-nationalist extremism in Ethiopia. I write about that. It's a whole spectrum. You can't just say these are the extremists and these are the moderate. It's not that simple. But that's still a huge problem. Most people get along fine across ethnicity. I know that. I see that in every city. They marry each other. They're friends, colleagues, business partners. But as the Ethiopians, they talk about Sostu, the terrible three, the Oromos, Amharas, and Tigrayans who tend to organize along ethnic lines. And
the unholy trinity, we call it.
Yeah, the terrible three. No, but it's said with a little bit of irony, right? Because they also get along great in so many ways.
So, to some extent, when we speak of this car of war, the fact that it has weakened, or at least I would say even torn the Ethiopian social fabric apart, is the painful aspect of this civil war, because I know it for a fact that the war has exacerbated the existing fault lines. And now we have more people identifying with respective ethnic identities. We have more ethno-nationalists, actually, which is heading toward fascism, if we are not already there. So that, for me, it is so painful, because it's so difficult that speaking the language of equality, fairness, justice, or even Ethiopianism is dwindling from day to day at a personal level. I just wanted to add on that.
But don't you think most people are a little bit Ethiopianist? The vast majority, they identify with Ethiopia.
I think that was the case sometimes ago, after 1997, as you said, or 2005. We had a huge mobilization of Ethiopians, as you know. That's why they were able to shake the establishment, and the EPRDF was, they were panicking, basically. And then the Ethiopian, that sense of Ethiopianism resurged again, right? They revived it in 2018 when Abiy was talking about pan-Ethiopianism. And now after the war, even the least suspected people, which we are going to discuss about, are the Ethiopians and the Fanos who are fighting to save Ethiopia. Now they are fighting the same regime, and they go beyond that. So I'm just saying that those people whom I know personally, with whom we have been working on media as Ethiopianists, now we have splintered into so many different groups. I cannot judge that by quite few elites, as you said, who are making noise everywhere on media, but still it is penetrating into the fabric of the society on the ground. And for me, that is very, very difficult to reverse.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if it's difficult to reverse, but it's definitely depressing.
Yeah. So then, before we move into the last section, I would like to mention one person, which is Dr. Theodros. You also mentioned Dr. Theodros so many times, and you are saying that Dr. Theodros was not there in his capacity as a technocrat, but he was also serving his old guard, the TPLF, and actually was one of the propagandists.
Yeah,
I think how is this so?
A lot of the people on that front page, a lot of these figures, people like Helen Clark, former Prime Minister of New Zealand, they were under the spell of Tedros, no doubt about it. Very close, and Mark Lowcock too, I think. But of course, that's hard to prove. But you can see that they've been working together for many years.
So you are referring to the vast network.
Oh yeah, they have a vast network. They have it's dangerous to point at this and that person and say he is part of that network, right? Because you don't have proof. But of course, you could say Tedros definitely was in the middle of that network of contacts in Brussels and Washington, D.C. and the UN system. Exerted a lot of influence and managed to get the TPLF narrative through. And definitely, yeah, I underestimated that as well at the beginning of the war. I didn't expect that to be so strong.
So now you are trying to make a point that the international community got Ethiopia deadly wrong, and that the media bias was there. A lot of factors explain why they got Ethiopia wrong and why they were biased, talking about the single story about Africa and the background knowledge about Ethiopia itself, about the famine and those the barbarians, which needs to be saved by the good doers and all that stuff. There is a lot in the book, because I have to spare your time that you will enjoy the book. By the way, the book is written in very appealing way, I would say, and you didn't use so many complex sentences, so it's very clear to anyone. It is artistic at the same time. But the rest, I will leave it to them. On the substantive issue, I might put my own review or comments sometimes later. With that, were you happy with the way the war ended? I am referring here about the Pretoria Agreement, the infamous Pretoria Agreement, or famous Pretoria Agreement. So are you convinced that the war should end that way? And so I'm referring to the factors, the actors like the Amhara group, the Eritreans who deeply believe that they were betrayed by the Pretoria Agreement. So are you okay with the Pretoria Agreement?
at the beginning, I was like most Ethiopian, frustrated, right? That there wouldn't be any prison or exile for some of these criminals from the TPLF. There should have been some kind of. But over time, I've begun to understand the wisdom of the Pretoria Agreement, because what would have been the alternative, right? It was awful when there was this self-congratulatory peace ceremony in Addis Ababa. It was I think it was in April 2023, with a Getachew, Reda, and Abiy hugging or whatever. I mean, that was it was tasteless, right? Because so many young people had died, and now they're just hugging and making up. Is that it, right? I can understand why a lot of people were offended by that, but the only way to change Tigray is to give the TPLF some responsibility for governing it. I don't think there's any alternative. Otherwise, it would have just been a smoldering insurgency, and the federal government would have been blamed for everything going wrong. So I think it was political realism. It was the only thing they could do. It was better than the alternative, but of course, frustrating for a lot of people, understandably so.
What about when it comes to its implementation? Then that is another dimension which so many people have got an issue with. I myself, I would say, I wrote a piece in December. No, it was in January, 3 months after the signing of the Pretoria Agreement. I said, and I would say confidently, that I forecasted what was about to happen. I said, a flawed peace process is a postponed crisis. That is what's happening. A postponed crisis in Amara, partly a postponed crisis with Eritrea and other stakeholders in the world. So I accepted the Pretoria Agreement in principle, like you said, but I had a lot of issues with it, and it is unfolding in front of our eyes this day. So when it comes to its implementation, now you see the TPLF, the relationship between the TPLF and the feds, and about so many other issues. Do you think that the Pretoria Agreement was honored by both parties as it was stipulated in the agreement itself?
No, you're right. It hasn't been fully implemented. They haven't completely disarmed and demobilized it. They still have fighters at the command of the TPLF, and also the disputed territories, Raya and Volkaid, what they call Western Tigray. They're still disputed, right? The internal displaced people, the refugees from those areas, haven't all gone back. But there is a process in train of, I think what needs to happen is that refugees have got to come back, and then they have to work out a solution that enables coexistence, right? I don't think the TPLF, frankly, should rule those territories again, at least not the way they behaved before the war. Stamping out the Amhara identity in those areas. I mean, I can understand there were a lot of grievances in that area from what happened over those years. So, but it's proceeding slowly. I don't think you should expect it to be smooth. And meanwhile, Amhara region has been completely weakened, right, by this new rebellion, this new war going on. So it's also very hard for the Amhara region to resist now when they're so divided.
Yeah, we'll be moving to the Amhara case. That would be the end of our discussion. But before that, do you think that Eritrea has some feeling of betrayal or resentment? Is there any legitimate concern from the side of the Eritrean government? Of course, they were the stakeholder, one of the stakeholders in the war. No denial about it. But do you think that the Eritreans would have been part of the agreement or treated differently? I mean, do you have any idea on?
No, I don't really know what they think.
Fallout between Eritrea and Abiy, Isaias and Abiy.
No, you would have to ask them about that. Really, I don't know what they think. I mean, clearly they don't have very good relations with Ethiopia anymore. I just hope they won't meddle in any internal Ethiopian wars. But they should have their territories, of course, respected as per the Boundary Commission and international law.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I will ask the Eritreans first time when I get the chance to ask. Of course, on behalf of the Eritrean, I asked actually Tromvol last time, and he provided your own insight on that. So, in the sake of time, I will move to the last point. But before that, if you distrust others, Don't others also have a justified reason to distrust you, in a sense that some of them are saying actually you are also sponsored by the Ethiopian government, particularly by the Abiy regime? What is your relationship with the Abiy regime in any way? Are you directly or indirectly supported by the Abiy, or do you have any particular animosity towards the TPLF?
No, I never even met anybody from the Abiy government. I've been interviewed by what's it called, Ethiopian news agency once. That's the closest I've got. I mean, I don't mind talking to them, but no, of course, I think these accusations that I've been paid, it's ridiculous. But I don't care. I don't have time for. You can't prove a negative. But yeah, I mean, I do have a deep dislike of the TPLF forced over many years. I know many wonderful Tigrayans. I've been to Tigray many times. It's a beautiful place, wonderful people, very decent, honorable people. But the way they misgoverned Ethiopia, of course, I dislike that. But there are political force you have to deal with. But I think that's maybe what made me so different from many of these journalists. I've lived in Ethiopia for a long time. I shared the Ethiopian people's frustration with the TPLF-led regime for so many years. The arrogance, the misguided economic policies, the cronyism and all that, the blatant ethnic favoritism in the army. So, of course, I do have a dislike of them that you could say that makes me biased, but yeah, I think I'm in tune with the Ethiopian people on that.
So they claim that the Ethiopian government was and its allied forces were hell bent on annihilating the Tigrayans as a people, and they survived a genocidal campaign, and then they actually believe that genocide was committed against Tigrayans, and anyone who is even commenting anything on this issue is either genocide denial or himself a genocider or genocide enabler. You are familiar with that discourse, so
yeah, of course, and it's complete nonsense. I mean, that Ethiopians didn't really have anything against Tigrayans, right? You walk through Addis Ababa, you listen to Tigrayan folk music, even in the gym, and in every restaurant. There's a special adoration for Tigrayan culture actually in Ethiopia as the sort of authentic, original Ethiopian culture. So no, I don't. Of course, there are extremists, that's for sure, and I'm sure there were atrocities committed, especially in Volcaid. But on the whole, I don't think Ethiopians have anything against Tigrayans. Quite the opposite.
Great. Let's move to the Fano uprising. It's still ongoing, as you said. You actually decided to include that in your book.
Right. Finally. Yeah. Because it is the hot topic of the day, right? Everybody wants to know about that.
There's the hot potato of the Ethiopian politics these days. And so anytime you try to comment on the ongoing issues, even on the recent past, you know that it evokes so many emotions, and it's not so easy. And nevertheless, we have to talk about it before we end this conversation, because that's also your final part of your book. People will still go and read the book, but for today's discussion, I have one important question, which is that the Amhara people has been prosecuted throughout recent history, at least within the existing constitutional order. You are familiar with it. They fought alongside the federal government, which is a fact, and they are pro-Ethiopian for long. That is another fact, and they believe that they have been prosecuted for so long that they cannot take it anymore, so that they have to take it upon themselves to defend the Amhara people. That's what they say. So I'm just building
right.
And finally, and then they also said that the Pretoria Agreement was basically betraying the cause of the Amhara people, including the Fano, who were basically fighting alongside the Ethiopian Federal Army to save Ethiopia, as you said, as you yourself mentioned. So given all these circumstances, don't you think that the Fano uprising is justified? That is my first question.
No, I think there are some grievances that valid. It's true that many of these ethno-nationalist movements in Ethiopia, they have demonized Amharas, right? They've made the Amharas into this oppressor people, and that's also very bad, of course. But a lot of the rhetoric from Fano is kind of similar to TPLF, in that we are victim of a genocide. We don't have any other option. We're going to die, all of us, if we don't fight back, and that's simply not true, right? In fact, Ethiopia is still very, Amharaphilic, you would call it. Like, look at the mainstream Oromos. They give their children names in Amharic. They speak fluent Amharic, better than Oromo in many cases, right? They love Teddy Afro and Astedaweke. They are very, you can't say that they are against Amharas, and yet they do not support Fano, right? So how can you be a viable option for the country if you cannot get any support from these moderate pro-Ethiopian unity mainstream Oromos, many of whom are even, Orthodox Christians? If you can't even get their support, then what is your project? How can your project succeed? It's impossible. So the only realistic way forward, if you want to keep Ethiopia united, is that, these mainstream Oromos, they are the vast majority who want Ethiopia to work as one country and have nothing against Amharas, or actually adore Amharic language and culture. They need to work together. They need to find a way forward. It's the only option. And
but they are saying they are under existential threat. That's what they're saying.
Yeah, no, that's simply not true. They're not under existential threat. They are weakening Amhara region right now. They're killing their own people in many cases, right? Mayors, even down to Kabila officials. Everybody's scared of being kidnapped. There's extortion, road tolls, kidnapping for ransom. It's disinvestment from Amhara region. It's terrible for Amhara region, and it's
but who is responsible for that? Exactly, but that's the point. Who is responsible for that? What is the federal government doing? Why is the federal government not being able to resolve the political difference through dialogue and negotiation, for example?
Sure, you're right, and also I have to give that to Fano. They do have a lot of popular support, right? So maybe you will have to negotiate with them. But what would happen if the federal army just withdrew completely, unilaterally? There could be a lot of people getting killed, right? A lot of moderate Amharas or non-Fano, anti-Fano Amharas would get killed, and would probably be quite chaotic. So they can't do that. That would be massive betrayal.
Let me bring one issue up before we end this section, and which is that it has been reported by the international media and the human rights organizations that extrajudicial killing was committed by the Ethiopian army, and I support the unity of Ethiopia, territorial integrity, and as much as possible, I'm not the one who is there to demonize the probably the only remaining institution with all its follies, which has to be maintained, and that is very public, and I've always been arguing about that. But it pains me when I see the Ethiopian army killing their own people, and even as we said that even war has its own limitations. So what happened in Gojam, for example, if we take the Marawi massacre, if you massacre your people indiscriminately, and civilians, and destroying and bombing and sending drones and killing children who are just getting out of baptism, as an objective person, as a pro-Ethiopian person, and that somehow would put you on the edge, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know exactly what happened. I would be very skeptical of some of the reports. There's also been a lot of fake propaganda coming out from Amhara region, but absolutely, to the extent it has happened, and I think it should be investigated, and there should be forensics. It's absolutely should be condemned. There should be justice for that. But you still need to keep sight of the bigger picture, the same as with the TPLF. There are also the federal army committed war crimes against innocent Tigrayans, and all that happened, I'm sure. But still, the bigger picture was that one side had legitimacy to use force and should have prevailed and needed to win the war for Ethiopia to move forward, and the other side needed to lose and had no legitimacy and was just as cruel and had nothing to offer, right? And no legitimacy. It's basically the issue of legitimacy. They had the legitimacy to rule Tigray as a regional government, but not to attack the federal army or keep any kind of control over the army. And I think it's the same in with Fano. It's a very different movement, completely different, but they're not bringing anything constructive to the table. They're not improving the lot of Amharas, neither in the short nor in the long run, and they haven't managed to forge any alliances with anybody, not even with other internationalist extremists. So that's basically my view. Fano needs to lay down its arms, negotiate something. Yeah, there are a lot of fair grievances, and it's true that Amharas have been demonized a lot in a lot of ethno-nationalist discourse. I don't do that. I'm always very careful not to single out or demonize or generalize even about any sort of ethnic group. This is usually nonsense. But yeah, I'm not a fan of Fano, as I've written about in the part 5 of the book.
Yeah, you are not supposed to be pro-Fano. All we expect is an impartial and unflinching view of what is happening. But then, yes, there is a lot in the book, and there is a lot remaining about the Fano movement itself because it's still ongoing. I will leave it there, but my final question is in order, which is, where do you see the ongoing confrontation between the Fano and federal government end up? Is there any negotiated settlement out of this quagmire?
Yeah, it looks like Fano's riven with the division, right, internally. So hopefully that could move some factions of Fano to move towards negotiation. But it's difficult, of course, if the others then refuse to abide by those terms. Yeah, I don't have any prediction of what's going to happen, to be honest. But I do notice that Fano is becoming less popular. It was quite popular among the Amharas, even in Addis Ababa at the beginning of the war. It's no longer so much because they haven't achieved anything. And, it doesn't look like they're ever going to move outside of Amhara region, where they're causing so much misery and death. So I hope it will gradually lose popular support and come to the negotiating table.
All right, but then throughout our discussion, you were using the term legitimacy time and again. What gives the Abiy regime greater legitimacy as compared to others? Because you said against the Tigrayans, that only the federal government had legitimacy, and again against Fano, there is only one group, which is the Abiy regime, which has a legitimacy.
They did win an election, didn't they? And a lot of people from Fano who support Fano, they praised this election, like Graham Peoples. He said, Abiy has won a huge mandate, he said, after the election in 2021. And now he thinks Abiy's a dictator who needs to be dislodged by force. You need to at least wait until the election. If you can then point to a clear fraud or something, well, then he would lose his legitimacy, right? But there was an election. I know it wasn't perfect. Also, to make a case for war, you need a realistic chance of making things better. You need broad popular support, not just from one ethnicity. And Fano doesn't have any of those basic conditions.
Fair enough. So doesn't this make you pro-Abiy and pro-Ethiopia? So are you pro-Ethiopian as a country or pro-Abiy regime?
No, absolutely, I'm pro-Ethiopian. I don't want to be seen to praise Abiy too much because who knows? Maybe I'll regret it one day. You never know. And of course, he's a politician. He's going to make mistakes. So it's probably wiser for me.
Is he not making historical mistake already? I'm just referring to, once you are here, I wanted to use as a last chance, because not a week ago, on Monday, there was unprecedented policy shift when it comes to economic policy.
Right, yeah, very interesting,
So that is a discussion by itself. I just wanted to know your thoughts, that Do you think that Abiy is also right on this, the way he opened up the economy with all those things which is happening?
No, I've lived in Chile most of my adult life, and I've seen how opening the economy can really work wonders. So I'm partial towards liberalization of the economy. I think a lot of people saying, "Oh, they've devalued the bird." I'm saying, "Well, where did you go to buy $1 for 57 bird before? You couldn't do that, right?" So it hasn't really devalued that much. So, and I think it will eliminate a lot of market distortion. So yeah, I would say I support that reform. Time will tell. How it depends on how it's carried out.
It lost already 59% in 3 days, sir.
Yeah, but not the real value.
No, yeah, the real value is the, as you said, is a informal black market, which was around 120, 170.
Because that's where you need to go. If you want to buy dollars, you have to go to that market. You won't get any dollars from the bank at 57 bird or whatever it is today, right?
We will be just chasing simply. So the dollar, then the black market will be 140 next day, and you're trying to chase it, then it will be 200. So that is how it works.
No, because the idea is you merge the two, right? So there won't be any black market. The black market will be legalized, essentially.
But that's what I'm saying. It may not be merged at all.
Well, in that case, it's not the reform they promised, because if they say market forces will determine, that means supply meets demand, and that's the price at which supply meets demand is the price that rules the market. So there wouldn't be any black market, right?
Well, market even determined slavery in the past. So market cannot determine everything. If you leave to the market can lead to any disastrous social consequences. This is a side talk, of course. I just brought it when I asked you whether you are supporting Abiy or Ethiopia. So
no, I need to keep a certain distance to the government as a journalist, independent journalist. I don't want to marry anybody, but I don't see any sort of alternative. Suddenly, they would have to beat Abiy in an election first. They would need to win against the Prosperity Party. There are some interesting opposition parties that you could vote for. I would recommend voting for non-ethnic parties, I must say.
If there are any, with that caveat these days.
Well, there are a few, yeah. And parties that have different religions and support democracy. And, well, for me, I like liberal economics, but fair enough if you have a different viewpoint.
I do. I've been the supporter of liberalization, but it should be in the kind of gradual opening up, not a radical departure that the Ethiopian government is doing. So I'm a kind of guy who is saying that making the environment safe for democracy kind of argument here. So making the environment ready for liberalization. So the Ethiopian economy was just like a stuffed house, okay, stingy, and you are opening it at once, and it will literally
I don't know if it's at once, but they can do food subsidies. Before they were doing fuel subsidies, right? Indirectly by subsidizing the dollar used to import fuel and fertilizer. They could continue to subsidize fertilizer and food. If they do that, I think everybody will be better off, but we'll see.
Yeah, the jury is out there. We will see it in a week, whether I'm wrong or right. As long as the economy works, I don't mind whether I am wrong 100 times.
Right.
So yeah. So
you get the idea that I'm not anti-liberal. I mean, that's why this whole thing, the betrayal of Ethiopia, shook me to my core, because I'm not anti-Western. I'm pro-liberal economics, but the facts were the facts, right? Ethiopia was betrayed.
Well, that is the central point of your book, and that's why you have it on the first on the cover, which says "Getting Ethiopia Dead Wrong," which was just out today. I really enjoyed reading the book, both versions, and I highly recommend all our viewers and those people who would join us later. And please read the book and provide your feedback and review it if you have time. And it was a pleasure having you, Rasmus, and I wish you all the best. But before that, if you have any message, final thought for the Ethiopian people, because since you said that the world betrayed Ethiopia, and if you have any message for the Ethiopian people.
Yeah, I write that it's a friendly people, right? I still believe it's a friendly. I think a lot of people in Ethiopia were disappointed. They're not only infuriated by this betrayal, but they were also heartbroken, right? Because they expected the world to help them against the attack of the TPLF. So yeah, it's still a friendly people, I think. But you know, maybe they will forgive the West, but don't do it again would have to be the message. I said, be careful you don't do it again, right?
So thank you so much. I hope this won't be the end of our conversation, and this brings us to the end of our today's conversation with my guest, Rasmus Soderriiis, who just wrote a new book entitled Getting Ethiopia Dead Wrong. This is our Ethiopia Today podcast. I am Moges Teshome, the host and the producer, and my guest is Rasmus Soderriiis. Thanks so much, sir, for joining me. I will see you soon.
Thank you very much, and
wish you all the best, and a good night.
Thank you very much. Also, thank you very much for waiting until my book was ready, so we could use it to promote it.
It's always a pleasure. Stay in touch. Have a good night. So this was our discussion. And for those of you who are just tuning in late, please read the book and view our video later and give us your feedback on how we can make it more interactive, on the rooms for improvement and what you find interesting and not, if you are not satisfied, we try our best to rectify it. So thank you for tuning in. Thanks so much for being with us. That was for it from us, and good night. Have a good day.